false flags occur a lot more often than you think, and they've been happening for about as long as people have been around, really. Because think about it. Haven't you ever had a sibling do something and then tell mama that you did it? Or a friend do something like that? Or somebody in class? Or somebody on the job? If people will do it on the job or as kids, what makes you think they wouldn't do it when they rise to real power? Huh? Do people's nature change? And they work. They work because people are stupid. Or perhaps you could call it, naive, to sugarcoat it a little bit. But either way, people keep doing them because they work. Anyway, I'm gonna show you how to spot one, sorta, a little bit, and I'm gonna give you some examples. So here goes. Now, first and foremost, false flags are a form of propaganda, and they're actually in the Army Psychological Operations Manual. I saw the page, there on the internet when I was looking that up. They always, however, require a spectacular event. Obviously, without a spectacular event, why would people pay any attention, But it gets a little nebulous because I've noticed that when people get red-pilled, they start to see false flags everywhere. Everything becomes a false flag, which of course it's not. So I've enumerated a list here of things to look for that might cause your ears to perk up when something happens, so that maybe you can be a little more astute. First, look for instant media saturation. All major media outlets start barking the same message, lockstep. But more importantly, look for what local sources say initially, because a lot of times they're going to refute the official media message. And they'll refute it for maybe, an hour or two until they learn what they're supposed to be saying, and then they'll change their mind and start saying the same thing that all the major media outlets do. And the major media outlets also start proposing what will later be implemented. The case is always quickly closed, and the major media won't question the official narrative. And you always, of course, have to have a scapegoat for the whole damn thing. And as a follow-up, there is always decisive and negative government action, which usually means the erosion of rights in the name of protection or military action or regime change overseas that couldn't otherwise be justified. Kind of like invading Iraq. And then there are always going to be anomalies and questions. There are going to be contradictions. There are going to be things that pop up that don't make any sense. And that's really when you know you're onto something. There are also certain patterns that emerge. Look for drills. Drills that are being held that same day, or drills that were implemented leading up to the event. And the drills will always mirror what actually is transpiring. For instance, on 9/11, there were at least 40 drills held nationally that precisely mirrored the exact events that were actually happening. That's what got people all confused that day and didn't know what the hell's happening, because they didn't know what was the drill and what was real. Always look for drills. That is your first dead giveaway. Your suspects are going to be linked to certain intel organizations. They're going to have these nebulous contacts that are lurking around in the shadows. And it doesn't necessarily have to be government organizations. They could have links to cartels. The Uvalde shooting, there was a drill being held just a few weeks before that mirrored the event. And that guy had some cartel connections. Commemorative slogans pop up. Hashtag this. Like, so-and-so strong, El Paso strong, or Waco strong, I don't know, just something like that pops up, and it suddenly seems to congeal around the event, a commemorative slogan, and then seamless integration across media. Everything all just falls right into place across all the media, lockstep. Anyway, that's a general pattern that by which you can more or less recognize what might be going on. And of course, naturally, even if you can recognize all these things, it doesn't necessarily prove anything. But at least it gets your ears perked up and it gets your radar going to where maybe you'll be a little. Now, let's look at a few historical examples, and I'll try to run through these quickly. There's the battleship Maine. Everybody talks about the battleship Maine. Well, there's a picture of it there. It blew up. It has been determined to have been done by sabotage, and since the Spanish had absolutely no reason to want to go to war with the United States, then I guess that kind of narrows it down, don't you think, on who did it? Then there's the Reichstag fire. The Nazis burned down their own parliamentary building and blamed it on the communists, and then once they done that, they used that as an excuse to take away everybody's civil liberties pretty much overnight. There's the Mukden incident, where Japan faked a false flag against China as an excuse to invade Manchuria. There's the USS Liberty. Now, that's a neat one because Israel did a false flag on us. They attacked the USS Liberty in the Mediterranean, hoping to draw us into the war against Egypt. They tried to set it up to make us think that the Egyptians were doing it. And they attacked the ship. They even machine gunned our men who were in the water. Okay? Then there's Operation Gladio. We in the NATO countries set up these terror organizations to go out and kill a bunch of innocent folks to blame it on the communists. I did a video on that one not too long ago called NATO Terrorism. And that's true. We did that. It's established. And then, of course, there's the Gulf of Tonkin, where we faked a so-called sea battle with North Vietnamese PT boats and Navy, and we used that as an excuse to get big into Vietnam. All a lie, every bit. And in the interest of brevity, I just kept it down to those. I could have listed off another 10 or 15 of them. I mean, you name it. This is done all the time. Let's go over a few examples in detail, and I'll start with the financial panic of 1907, which was not done by a state actor. It was done by a corporate entity. It was done with dangerous loans and a sudden tightening of credit, which caused the banks to collapse with a run on banks throughout the country, even on healthy banks. Kind of reminds you of 2008, huh? With all those dangerous loans that collapsed. But anyway, there was a guy named Senator Robert Owen and a ton of other researchers who have concluded that it was all engineered. And of course, as I said, that was used as a pretext to institute the Federal Reserve Bank, which controlled the interest rates and the ebb and flow of money throughout the country. And what most people don't realize is that the people behind the false flag were the people who owned the bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is a private institution. It's a private bank. The money you carry in your pocket isn't really money. Each dollar is an instrument of debt that the country owes back to the Fed. We borrow the money we spend from the Fed and then pay it back with the very money that we borrowed in the first place. Anyway, the New York branch of the Federal Reserve, which is the most powerful, it's owned by 8 families, 4 in the United States and 4 in Europe. I could only find one source for that, but it seemed like a pretty genuine source for me. The ones in the United States are Goldman Sachs, Rockefeller, Lehman's, and Kuhn Loeb here in the United States. And in Europe, of course, you've got the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Lazards, and Israel Moses Seifs in the European Union or in Europe. Can you imagine how stinky rich those sons of bitches are getting off this whole thing? Think about that. Now, next is the Lusitania. It's a particularly infamous example of a false flag perpetrated by Winston Churchill, who was the British Lord of the Admiralty back then. And probably Franklin Roosevelt as well, who was the Secretary of Navy here. But anyway, Germany was sinking British shipping at an alarming rate. They were strangling British economy like you would not believe. Britain was using passenger liners to transport munitions to get around the U-boats, thinking that they could do that without the U-boats sinking them. But of course, Germany knew that. And as it pertains to Lusitania, they actually tried to take out ads in the American papers telling people not to get on the Lusitania. And of course, the ads were mysteriously squelched. There was one paper that put out one ad briefly, and that's how we know they tried to do it. But they actually tried to warn Americans not to get on the damn ship. But anyway, the Lusitania, it was routed right through an area where 3 other ships had been sunk just recently. And not only did they not give the Lusitania destroyer protection, they assertively withdrew destroyer protection. And of course, the Lusitania was sunk, and it did have tons of arms that's been established. And a lot of Americans died, and that, more than anything, got America ready to jump into the war to support England. And, oh, the propaganda. Look at that picture right there, that woman and her baby. You know, I can look at that and almost cry. Lord. And that was 100 years ago. The color revolutions, they're a type of false flag, and we've been doing these all over the world forever. They're some symbols there of color revolutions. They're always a clenched fist. They require a certain series of steps to be implemented, and I'll go over these quickly because I don't want to get this thing too long. But anyway, you have to have money for core leaders to build the infrastructure. So somebody's got to bankroll it. See, the whole thing is to make it look like it comes up from the people, when in fact it's really being astroturfed. They hire foot soldiers and trainers. Then they establish a social media infrastructure, Twitter. That's why Twitter was so necessary to all the things they wanted to do, and why it pissed off so much when Musk took it over. Then they establish a physical infrastructure, office space, signs, posters, tents if they're going to do a tent city. But then you have to create an event, or I guess exploit an event. And of course, here in the United States, we had George Floyd, which of course attracts the public out for demonstrations, because you already have the infrastructure established. You can get out in the street and attract people in and have major demonstrations almost overnight. And then of course we had rioting and all that stuff. And this next step is essential. You have to provoke a heavy-handed response from the police. You need to get the police to get out and shoot some folks and beat people up and get it all on cell phone video, and then you can put it all over the world and make yourself look good, you know, to get sympathy. And I had never realized until reading this, that's probably why the government didn't send the police in, or the National Guard, to break up all those riots. Everybody decries Trump for not using the Insurrection Act to clear out all the rioters. And I thought that was pretty bad too. But then when I realized that is the linchpin of the whole thing. If you don't have a heavy-handed police response, you don't have a color revolution. It can't work. So allowing all those people to burn and loot that summer, 2020, you know, it was a masterstroke. But then, anyway, once you get the heavy-handed police response, you get support from politicians. That gives you legitimacy. You start getting media coverage. Then you have international support. And the government, whichever government happens to be, they usually acquiesce and allow the revolutionaries to absorb power. Let's look at a couple in detail, and I'll start with Operation Ajax in Iran. British Petroleum was running all the oil out of Iran. They had pretty much a monopoly. And they were supposed to give the Iranians like half of the money that they made. Well, they didn't think they were getting it, so Mohammad Mossadegh challenged them to have an audit, and of course, British Petroleum refused, and so Iran nationalized the oil. After that, Eisenhower and Churchill authorized a coup to get rid of Mossadegh. So they set off bombs to kill innocent people, to blame communists and those loyal to Mossadegh. Then they hired a bunch of gangsters to go out and make some pro-Shah riots on the day of the coup. Now, the Shah is the king. The whole idea is to put the king back in power. So they hired gangsters to stage pro-Shah riots on the day of the coup, and they bust in people to support it. Then they hired a bunch of people who were bribed by us, and they sent them in to attack the Shah's symbols to make Mossadegh look bad and turn the public opinion toward the Shah, and it worked. They had to put in a new prime minister who got paid the equivalent of $657 million to do what they wanted him to do. Anyway, the Shah came in. He set up a horrible tyranny. It was so bad that when the people finally threw the Shah off, the Islamic Republic was instituted, and we're feeling the fallout from it to this very day. Let's look at what we did to poor Guatemala back in the early 50s. There was a guy named Jacobo Arbenz who pressed for land reform. He took over the government. He was duly elected, democratically elected, and he was going to institute some land reform because the United Fruit Company owned all the land in Guatemala. You've heard of Banana Republic? They're talking about Guatemala when they say that. But anyway, Eisenhower, of course, he authorized a coup. They set out to prove that he was a commie to the world. The CIA planted Russian weapons in Nicaragua to try to link those to Arbenz. And the Nicaraguan president helped out by saying that a sub had dropped off those weapons and that Arbenz was organizing death squads to go around the country killing folks. The CIA then planted Russian weapons in Guatemala and set up a radio station to recruit for the rebellion, saying that Arbenz was planning to replace the military with the People's Militia, which would be the same thing as like what I just said, death squads. They tried to bribe Arbenz with a ton of money. They dropped a bunch of money into a Swiss bank account, and all he'd have had to have done was walked away and taken the bribe, but he wouldn't do it. He didn't take the money. Next, we set up phony newspaper articles all over the world saying that Arbenz was a commie, which created the false impression that turned world opinion against Arbenz. Then, mysteriously, more weapons were discovered in Nicaragua and Guatemala. The radio made up fake atrocity stories, and the rest is history. United Fruit got what they wanted. Corporations control the United States of America. Your votes don't. Corporations control your politicians. And they use our military as a goon squad to go all over the world to implement their policies and aggrandize their wealth and power. And what happened to poor Guatemala is just, it's a sine qua non example of what we do.
100 yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense down.